Greetings all, Ferrari-Man 601 here. What do we see before us today? Well, this is Formula Hybrid 2022 Evo. Or is it? Is it the Formula Hybrid X 2022 Evo? Is it the Formula Hybrid Evo X 2022? Whatever it is the latest product from RaceSim Studio. Now, latest product, you may say, well, not exactly. This car initially came out as Formula Hybrid X 2021 back in the early months of 2020 when the 2021 rules were supposed to be the 2021 rules and not the 2022 rules in 2022. But of course, the world happened between then and now, and therefore, this rules package overall was pushed back 12 months in reaction. However, RaceSim Studio at that time, they gave us Formula Hybrid X 2021, as it was called at the time. The car has had a name change since then. It's now become 2022, and now we have got a different specification. We have Formula Hybrid X 2022 Evo. What's going on here? Well, you might notice just aesthetically, we've got a couple of obvious differences between this Evo spec, or B spec if you will, and the initial A spec of X 2022. First of all, you can see the nose here. We've got a completely different front end on this car. We have now got a leading edge of the front wing that is very clearly in front of the nose tip. This is a departure from what we saw on the A spec of the car. We have got some different flick-ups and bits and bobs around here. On the front axle there, we have got these two louvers over the front axle, over the front tires, and they're different from what we had before. They're a little bit thicker and a little bit shorter longitudinally. It's a bit of an interesting touch. Midsection of the front end, we've got barge boards where we had no barge boards before. Trailing edge of the floor here on the three-quarter view, you can see we've got this little duckbill thing. That's interesting. It's a little vortex generator, I suppose. That's new. Around the rear end, we've got a revised diffuser, those two big underbody tunnels exiting through there. That's a bit different. I like that. Rear crash structure looks like it's been dressed up a little bit with some logos back there. I like that. We've got these tires, which the textures from them anyway have been somewhat carried over from the F90 V12 that RaceSim Studio also gave us last year. Those were some fantastic tires, and they've taken some of those textures and they've brought them up to snuff a little bit more, and they've put them here. And we have got these louvers across the engine cover, and over on the RSS Discord, the lead modeler CC was absolutely obsessing over these louvers. Evidently they took ages to put together in the UV bake before everything is packaged up and put together for a download over on Selfie. But yeah, we have got an Evo spec of Formula Hybrid X 2022. Why does this thing exist? Well, those of you who've been following the Formula One World Championship now in 2021, you may remember that at the British Grand Prix, which as of recording this was yesterday, they unveiled a show car for 2022. It's a non-running car from what I'm led to believe, but it showcases, generally speaking, the aerodynamic regulations that we can expect to see in Formula One beginning next year, as in 2022. Because technically speaking, we were already supposed to be here, but the world happened. So here we are. Generally, though, RaceSim Studio, they always give us some absolute premier level products, and that's no exception here. And it was no exception with the initial variant of this car in its first release in the beginning of 2020. But these guys are absolutely relentless in their pursuit of perfection, if you can even begin to define whatever perfection might actually be. And as they get more experience in putting these products together, they realize that they can do some things a little bit better. Perhaps there are some things that they don't need that they chose to include on earlier projects. So they've gone back in and they have reimagined and reworked and revitalized this Formula Hybrid X project that they debuted last year, and they've just brought it up to mid-2021 spec in terms of the technology and techniques that are available to them. By and large, it is very much the same car that we have seen for the last 18 months or so, but just little hints of refinement have gone into this all over. I would say that if we wanted to quantify this as a percentage, I would say that this car is about 70 to 80% new in terms of what you see on the surface. underneath, what we have here is still very much in keeping with what we had on the previous iteration of the car that we've had for the last year and a half. And if we go into the cockpit, you'll see what I mean here. Yes, we do have some changes here aesthetically. You will notice that the mirrors are in a slightly different position now. They have got an extra stalk coming out of them to connect them to the exterior bodywork and one to the monocoque proper. That's very reminiscent of the FIA show car that we saw at Silverstone, so that's a little bit of a tweak there. We have got the little, what do we call them? Fairings, fenders, don't call them fenders, please. It's still an open wheeler, I think. But we've got those revised little flick ups over the front tires there just to control some of the turbulence that comes off of the tread surface of the tire. You've got that wide spinning thing in the airflow, and it's not great for airflow, all things considered. So we've got a control device there to try and just condition the air as it's coming off of the front axle, trying to reduce wake turbulence and therefore vortices that create dirty air for the guys behind, which is one of the things that this whole set of regulations is endeavoring to minimize. So we've got that. They've been revised. They're a little bit more contained into the track of the car there. They basically come halfway across the tops of the front tires, so that's cool. And they've got that little louver there in that sort of bifurcation of the main panel there to control some high pressure air that might get trapped between the tread surface and the underside of that winglet. So that's cool, and it's a little bit of I want to say a nod, but it's not a nod at all, but is reminiscent of the louvers that you see on the front axles of Le Mans prototypes, both past and present there. Otherwise, you get lift. But anyway, you'll see looking down through the cockpit here, the steering wheel from Precision Sim Engineering, that remains from X 2021, as it was known at the time, as well as Formula Hybrid 2019. So that's cool. The sounds in this car as well are the same as we had in the initial release of Formula Hybrid X. So they are patterned after what was at that time the 2019 Honda engine. Sounds absolutely fantastic. I feel like they've been tweaked a little bit, just refined, smoothed out a little bit. Some of the foamy and crackly bits, they're not quite as prevalent anymore, so I do appreciate that. But by and large, it still feels very much the same. We're very much used to what we've got here. And the rest of the cockpit, again, very, very similar to what we had before, but you just get the sense that things have just been looked over one more time and just refined that ever so slightest degree more, which everything, when you pull back, it all conspires to create a yet more convincing visual presentation. So it's very, very nice there. But aside from what's new on the car, what do we have that we are well familiar with? Well, we mentioned the engine sounds. They're still pretty much the same as we've all seen. However, we've also got the same engine. We've still got that single turbo V6 90-degree bank angle mounted longitudinally behind the fuel tank there in a true mid-engine layout. Rear suspension is mounted to the engine and gearbox assembly. The engine still has an MGU-H and an MGU-K, which conspire to deliver 990 horsepower thereabout. So quite a lot of impetus in this thing. We've still got the 8-speed plus reverse semi-automatic gearbox in here, so that's all well familiar. We've still got 560 newton meters of torque. However, we do now have slightly more weight. We have 790 kilograms. Now, why is this? Well, when RaceSim Studio initially released the first version of this car back in the early days of 2020, some peculiarities and particulars about what the formula weight actually would be for these proposed regulations, they were still being ironed out. However, now we know that we're going to have a formula weight of around about 790 kilograms. So 790 kilograms is what this car in front of us weighs right now. When you top it off with fuel, well, then you're starting to talk about these things weighing the better part of a metric ton. And a metric ton is, well, a metric ton. We can get into all sorts of pros and cons as to why an open-wheeled race car needs to weigh a ton. But that is a different bit of pontificating for a different day. All I can say is that as we get closer to these regulations being reality, we have more information about them, more information about how they'll be implemented, and therefore RaceSim Studio with this information is able to go back in and refine their products to make them that much more authentic. And as much as I definitely do not like the idea of open wheelers weighing a ton, well, that's what we've got, and well, if we want to be realistic, then we've got to be realistic, and that's what we have here. But enough about what this thing is, what's the same, what's different. How does it drive? Well, we've got to drive it then. And where else should we drive it? You probably already know where we're going. Imola. let's see how this thing goes. Just a little bit of a shakedown. I'm not going to go crazy in depth because I don't want this to be too long, as it's not a formal full-on review. But to Imola next. Stand by.
Welcome to Imola. Yes, in recent months, home of the Grande Premio Fatto in Italia, Emilia-Romagna Grande Premio, or Grande Premio Emilia di Romagna, Fatti in Italia, something like that, made in Italy, Heineken, whatever. Yeah. Anyway, it's Imola, and where else can we possibly go if we're going to be doing one of these shakedowns? Yeah, it's a bit of a meme. I am keenly aware that I have done 7 trillion videos featuring Imola, and I don't much care. Because, yeah, this is what we have got here. Yeah, Formula Hybrid X 2022 Evo. Yeah, underneath the sunlight here in the pit lane. It looks even better when it's actually loaded up into the sim proper, I do have to say. Like all of that, you've got all the details there for your rain light and, of course, the little auxiliary lights in the end fences there that were brought in for, was it 2019? Or was it 2020? It was one of those years, but they're retained, obviously, on this car, and they will be retained once again for 2022 and probably forevermore, because once Formula One grows appendages, it doesn't tend to lose them. But there it is in the sunlight. It looks absolutely fantastic. And I've got to say as well, these wheel covers here, I meant to point these out in the showroom. They're the same as they were on the initial version of the car, but I think they're just cleaned up a little bit more, and they look a whole lot better from the trackside cameras, as you will undoubtedly see. However, back into the pit lane with us in the pit menu, and we'll get into what we see here on the setup screen. On the gear display, we do not have any adjustable gears on this car. I am terribly sorry to the 3 of you who really care about adjustable gears on these cars, but you don't have it in Formula One, therefore you don't have it here either. Tires, we've got several tire compounds to choose from. We've got softs with the red sidewalls, the mediums with the yellow or orange, that's yellow, sidewall there, the hards with the white sidewalls, and the visual wet, which is a carryover from a quality of life update from the initial release of this car. Doesn't do anything for us anymore, at least not visually. I don't think it does anything in terms of the physics either, but it's still there. It's probably something that Racing Studio will clean up in a little silent update. Tire pressures around all 4 corners. I've got it set to 18 PSI. The range of adjustment is between 10 and 24. And just in the left front there, you can see how the car will rise and fall as the tire pressure instantaneously jumps up. So we'll bring that down to 18 all around. Fuel, everything is zeroed out here to keep the engine quiet, but the maximum fuel capacity is 140 liters, as you can well see. That's cool. Electronics, all of your hybrid deploy and recovery settings are here. MGUK delivery, these are the same par for the course settings that we get on all of the hybrid cars from Racing Studio and practically all of the hybrid cars in Assetto Corsa. Recovery settings off of the rear axle ranges between 0 and 100%. The MGU-H harvest mode, it will send power to the battery or send it back into the KERS unit in the rear axle for more power. And the engine braking there, this is basically your off-throttle hang time in terms of how much air goes through the engine when there's no fuel going into it. Aerodynamics, we got front and rear wing, and that's about it. Angles of attack do not change visually, but the effects, of course, are modeled 36% or 36 degrees, rather, on the front wing, or all the way down to 0. And on the rear wing, it is a similar story. 0 is the minimum, but 12 is the maximum. So all of that looks well and good. Brakes, brake bias, and brake power, that's good. Defaults to 53% to the front. Ranges between 46 and 64% relative to the front axle. Drivetrain diff in power, coast, and preload. That's cool. I like an open diff, so it's open. Alignments, camber, and toe on all 4 corners there with the default values shown. Our main suspension screen with anti-roll bars front and rear, ride heights, wheel rates, and travel ranges for all 4 corners in the principal dampers. Your bound and rebound rates also available here for all 4 corners in suspension 3. Suspension 4, the heave dampers there for the 3rd spring, basically, in the front and rear of the chassis. We've got the 3rd springs embedded in the front end of the monocoque as well as on top of the gearbox casing, and the bump stops there, finally there, for all of your suspension arrangements there on all 4 corners. Steering assist, I never touched this. It defaults to 80, whatever it does. And the halo here, Step 0 is the halo, and Step 1 is the center pillar of halo entirely removed. There is no transparent business here. It is all just entirely deleted. If that center stay of halo bothers you particularly, it does not bother me particularly, which is why it will remain here. Regardless, let's get some gas on board and let's see what it does. Call it 31 liters, whatever. And in the cockpit. Car is alive. We've got all the instrumentation up. Same steering wheel as we had in this car previously, as well as the same steering wheels that we had in Formula Hybrid 2019 and 2020. We do not have the second page that you got in FH19. That was not retained for 2020 either, and it's not here. That was never here in any version of this car, past or present, but instrumentation remains the same. Shift lights across the top, as you can see, they're blinking because we're in the pit lane. We've got water temp, I believe that is, in the upper left. We've got our hybrid system status there in terms of the master charge in the car, and our per lap allotment there in the green and blue bars on the left. Toward the top, you can see lap time tick past 7 minutes. Below that, gear position indicator. We've got neutral right now, all the way up through the box into 8th, and all the way down back through neutral and then into reverse. All of that's well and good. Bottom row, we have got our speed in kilometers per hour in our case, fuel level of 31 liters, our current position, laps run, and then across the right column, we will have our current lap delta. We'll have our last lap time, our best lap time, engine RPM numerically there, 3,700 idling. And of course, that's going to update in real time. And then that just about covers the instrumentation here. The two green lights you can see flashing away, that's for our DRS status. One green light means that DRS is available, and the second one means that DRS is open. I happen to be in a DRS zone in the pit lane, so I've got DRS control right about now. And of course, the flap will open up on the rear wing. However, before the thing cooks itself, let's get out on track and see what it does briefly. There we are, 7,300 revs on the limiter there at 80 clicks off of the limiter. Into all the gears. Bring up some brake temperature and bring up some tire temperature. I did not have the tires in the warmers. Not entirely authentic, but I just don't like tire warmers very much. Gotta be a bit deliberate in bringing the brakes up. The tires, you don't really have to worry so much about them here because these are the 18-inch wheels that we will be getting starting next year. It's another thing I don't quite understand about why Formula One decided to do it, but it's what we're going to get, so we will deal with it. So the tires are basically a self-healing problem. They will warm up just because we're running. The brakes, you do have to think about the brakes. However, just a couple of big stops, and we've got several big stops around the lap here. That will take care of itself in due course. There's full revs there. Upshifting at about 11.6 when you get the blue lights. It will rev out to like 12.6 or so, but no real reason to go that high. DRS open. And no hybrid on at the moment. There goes 300 clicks. 9:39.80 for our first lap. I think we're going to do better than that this time around. But now at least you can see all the instrumentation is alive. We have got 5 digits there in our delta, as you might well expect. And now, of course, you can hear all of those sounds at full song. They are effectively carried over from the previous iteration of the car. But again, they do feel like they've been cleaned up just a little bit. There's a big stop for you. Any doubts we had about the brake temperatures are now entirely erased. And now with some proper temperature, we can speak representatively. What is going on in here? Well, we mentioned that the car now weighs 790 kilograms ready to go, minus fuel. So it's heavier than it was before. That coupled with this thing having significantly less overall downforce than even the current spec 2021 car does. The 2020 car, basically no comparison at all. The 2021 car has about, I would say, a 10 to 15% drop overall in downforce. Basically, it's limited to rear downforce in terms of where the big cuts happen. But here, it's a global loss, and you definitely feel that. It does make the car a little bit less, shall we say, eager to go into high-speed corners at full tilt. That's to be expected. But also, the effect of losing the downforce is masked quite heavily by the increased weight. Again, 790 kilograms, not counting fuel load. This is a heavy car. There are actually some club racing cars that you can go out and buy that are lighter than this. So we're talking about something that's pretty substantial, and on full tanks, we've got the better part of a ton. There are some fully fledged road cars that are well lighter than that. So it's a bit of a different kettle of fish in terms of what you'd expect to get from a modern open-wheeler, never mind a classic one. Formula 90 V12 that we alluded to in showroom, that thing weighs 503 kilograms, ready to go. Even on full tanks, you're still only talking about 630 or so. So you've got yourself quite a big weight margin between something that's 31 years old and this, which is minus 1 year old. Such is the way of the world. Things have gotten heavier because they've tried to make them safer. And by making them safer, they also make them slower, which, again, that's a different story for a different time. But what we have here, despite the ability to feel the market weight increase, does it affect the way that the car is communicating with me? Not particularly. I'm quite keen of where all four corners are. I know exactly where it wants to be and where I need it to be. And generally, the feedback loop is pretty good. Through corners like this, yes, there will be understeer. That first part of Acqua Minerale, yes, there is a huge amount of understeer that you are going to get just because it is so heavy. The front axle does not want to put up with trying to sling, at this point, about 800 kilograms around. So we've got a lot of inertia that needs to be canceled, and it needs to be canceled through these much thinner tires. These are going to be some of the thinnest tires that Formula One has had in almost 70 years. So that's going to be interesting with the heaviest cars Formula One has ever seen. We'll see how that goes in the real world. But here, it just means that you're going to cook these tires a whole lot more quickly than you would even on the 2021 car with the 13-inch wheels. So just more variables to consider. You do feel that there is a whole lot less give in the tire as well, because they necessarily have to be much harder than they are currently to deal with the loss in sidewall deflection. Because, believe it or not, in setting up the suspension of any race car, but an open-wheel race car in particular, where unsprung weight versus sprung weight is so important because you're trying to control center of gravity and other things, they will take into account the tire sidewall deflection as part of the suspension movement, so they can run slightly stiffer springs because they can count on the deflection of the tire itself. They're losing a lot of that window with these larger wheels and therefore thinner tires, so you're going to have to run a little bit more of a compliant suspension, which means that you're going to be losing agility, particularly on initial turn-in. It's going to react a little bit more slowly to the bumps, which will have the pleasant side effect of making things a little bit more controllable, but you're losing the all-out, ferocious, raw pace that we've been seeing from really 2017 when the now last set of regulations came into effect. And I think that's a little bit of a loss. We're just not going to see these guys going totally flat out anymore, at least in terms of being relative to what we see right now. I think that's a bit of a shame. But with the master global reset that we're going to be getting with these regulations, they will be flat out as far as these cars will allow, and, well, I suppose that's still going to be exciting. If I had my way, we would have gone in a completely different direction, but I don't get my way. And neither do any of you. So at least we're all in this together. That's not to say, though, by any means, that what we have here by Race Sim Studio is anything other than as I said in the showroom, a premier level product in every way. From the external modeling that we took a good look at, everything looks absolutely immaculate. And from in here, everything is absolutely great. I mean, it's similar enough to the initial version of the car where it immediately feels familiar. I know exactly how I need to approach it. I know generally what it wants to do, but it's in the nuances where you're going to notice a difference. Because the car is heavier than its stablemate, you do get some slightly different chassis dynamics, particularly over the bumps, over the curbs. It will bounce a little bit more, but at the same time, it's going to be generally more compliant, I'm feeling. That harmonic bounce that we just got over the apex curbs at Rivazza 2, you notice that it just sort of porpoised for a little while, and it will do that because it's heavier. That's something that's just going to take a little bit of a master reset of the brain to deal with. But you will understand those dynamics. You'll just wait for the car to settle down, and then it just goes right back to doing generally what an open wheeler does in terms of taking fast corners at ridiculous speeds and more or less staying compliant unless the rear end overtakes you. What I did there was actually, believe it or not, deliberate. I would approach this Villeneuve complex like that in the 2021 car or the 2020 car, and it will stick. It will not stick here. Why? Because we have got the better part of 80 kilograms more weight behind us, and that is going to be the defining factor between this car and its immediate predecessors. We've got a whole lot less global downforce, and we've got more weight, which means that when it comes to big time fast changes of direction, it's not going to do it. And when it does do it, it's going to do it far more quickly than the tires can react, which means we're going to see some spins. Of course, all the drivers are professionals, and they've been doing this in some cases for longer than I've been alive, which means, well, they're going to manage. They'll manage just fine. One more lap here. Let's go for the hot lap mode. Manual deploy down the straight. Just touched 330 before we got to jump on the binders. And the rear end overtakes the front once again. That was not intentional. More weight actually means that it's a little bit difficult to get the thing going once you've stopped. We'll harvest a little bit. We're back up to 100% already. We barely used any power, so that's fine. Manual deploy. Gain a little bit of time for the 16 seconds we lost. Getting a little bit more front brake bias. And it actually is somewhat easy to lock those front wheels, which is interesting, I will say. 54. Cool. All right, let's try that one more time. I think I want to go back to 53 and just call it a wash. Fine. A bit more careful through there this time. Rears are going off a little bit. A little twitchy as the tires wear in. That's interesting. Definitely don't get that so much on the current car. Just wants to snatch the rear under heavy braking now. That's, I guess, expected. We are putting a lot of energy through that rear axle. The front's more so, but the rear does not have the inertial advantage at that point with this squat under heavy braking. Of course, going to be nose biased, a little bit of oversteer. So it can be twitchy. We have learned something here. It can be a bit twitchy, which can make things a bit interesting. But there it is. It's 122.16. I'll take that. Nothing to write home about. But I feel reasonably representative of what you can expect to do out of the box in this thing on low tanks. We got 12.7 liters on board. Of course, on full tanks, I'd expect lap times to be closer to the 130s, believe it or not. Which for a medium-length circuit like Imola, but a very high-speed circuit, that's too slow. In my opinion, that is too slow for a Formula One lap time around this place, but again, a different set of pontification for a different day. Light up the rear axle over the AstroTurf on the exit. That right there is the only reason why I can't get a comparable 2020-2021 pole lap at this place in Assetto Corsa. That AstroTurf is not there in the real world. They're using all the curbing that is actually there. But back to the pits with us. And there it be. RSS Formula Hybrid X 2022 Evo, if we don't go through the entire world. There we are. Cool. It's a very interesting car, and I like this overall motif of Race SimCity going back and remastering some of their older projects, because they always get better at what they do, and the little bits that they learn here and there with each successive release, it's very nice to see them come back and revisit some of these, because they are great and they were great as they were released to us. But you do sometimes get the sense from anything, not just a product like this, but any work of a master, you do wonder, what would they do if they came back and gave it another go? And well, we have an answer to one of those questions here today. Are we going to see more things of this sort of nature from Race Sim Studio? Well, we might. I know some things that I'm not at liberty to talk about. We might. Definitely keep your eyes open. But Formula Hybrid X 2022 Evo, it is a free update to the Formula Hybrid X now lineup that's available to you if you are an owner of the car as it was initially released. You should have gotten emails by this point from Race Sim Studio about that. If you have not, check their Discord or check their customer service page and see if you can get a link emailed to you. However, if you're not already an owner or whatever happened, you didn't get the email and they don't have you on file, well, it's not going to break your bank either, and definitely, I would say, a worthwhile investment to your Assetto Corsa lineup, because everybody is now going to be having their sights set on what Formula One is going to look like next year, and you can experience perhaps just a little fraction of what that's going to be right now in July of 2021. So there it is, a much shorter review video, if you will, for you this time. I don't have a spare 17 hours to put this one together, but I do hope that you found it informative and enjoyable. There will be hot laps here at Imola to follow without my commentary, so you can hear all of these sounds from onboard as well as externally. Very few differences from what we had previously, but enjoyable nonetheless. So stay tuned for the hot laps, everyone, and until next time, Ferrari Man 601 saying thank you all very much for watching, and of course, we will see you soon.